My name is Colonel Sofia Martinez, and I was sitting in the back corner of the Meridian Industries boardroom when the red phone rang. Not the conference phone, not the desk phone. The red phone. The one that sits in a locked drawer behind the CEO's chair. The one that most people in that room didn't even know existed. The one that hadn't rung in 3 years. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I watched from my position near the window as Richard Blackwood, the company's founder and CEO, froze mid-sentence. His quarterly presentation to the board of directors hung suspended in the air like smoke. 63 slides about market projections and revenue streams suddenly meant nothing. The phone rang again, sharp, insistent, cutting through the polished mahogany and Italian leather like a knife through silk. Blackwood's eyes found mine across the room, not his CFO's, not his head of securities, mine. The woman his daughter had introduced 20 minutes earlier as just someone from logistics coordination. The woman who'd been sitting quietly, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, invisible to everyone except the person who mattered most. "Excuse me," Blackwood said to the 15 board members, his voice steady but his knuckles white against the presentation remote. "I need to take this." He walked to his desk, withdrew a key from his vest pocket and unlocked the drawer. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Chicago traffic 30 floors below. "This is Blackwood," he said into the receiver. I already knew what the voice on the other end was saying. I'd been monitoring the channels for the past 48 hours. A manufacturing facility in Taiwan, critical defense contracts, a cyber breach that could compromise military supply lines across the Pacific, the kind of crisis that could reshape international relations if it wasn't contained within the hour. "I understand," Blackwood said. "Yes, she's here." Every head in the room turned toward the door, expecting someone to enter, but Blackwood's gaze remained fixed on me. "Colonel Martinez," he said, his voice carrying across the room like a command. "We need you." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was profound. The kind of silence that happens when reality shifts so suddenly that the human brain needs a moment to catch up. Coffee cups stopped moving. Breathing became conscious. The scratch of fountain pens on paper ceased entirely. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the woman who'd been seated next to me, turned with confusion written across her face. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been explaining to me how difficult it was to find qualified logistics personnel these days. How the younger generation just didn't understand the importance of attention to detail. How she'd been in corporate consulting for 30 years and had never seen standards decline so rapidly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did he say Colonel?" I stood slowly, smoothing my navy blazer, the same blazer I'd worn to every board meeting for the past 18 months. The same blazer that had made me invisible, unremarkable, just another face in a room full of faces. "Yes," I said simply, "he did." The transformation wasn't dramatic. No uniform appeared, no medals materialized, no flags unfurled, but something in my posture changed. Something in the way I held my shoulders, the way I walked across that boardroom floor. The same walk I'd used crossing desert compounds and navigating crisis command centers from Seoul to Stuttgart. Board members I'd sat next to for over a year suddenly seemed to see me for the first time. Margaret Chen, the head of international operations who'd never bothered to learn my name. David Thompson, the former state senator who'd once asked if I could fetch him coffee. Rebecca Walsh, the venture capitalist who'd spent months discussing corporate strategy without ever asking for my input. They were all staring now. Blackwood handed me the phone. "Pentagon emergency line," he said quietly. "They've requested you by name." The receiver felt familiar in my hand, heavy, serious, real in a way that quarterly reports and market analyses never were. "Colonel Martinez speaking," I said, my voice carrying the authority that had been dormant for months, sleeping beneath spreadsheets and supply chain logistics. "Colonel, this is General Patricia Lawson, Joint Chiefs. We have a situation." I knew General Lawson, had briefed her personally on 3 separate occasions. had implemented her strategic recommendations across 2 continents, had earned her respect in ways that couldn't be quantified in quarterly performance reviews. I'm listening, General. Taiwan manufacturing breach. Defense contractor networks compromised. We need your cyber warfare expertise immediately. How quickly can you be mobilized? I glanced at the room full of board members, their faces now painted with confusion and something that might have been awe. These people who'd known me as the quiet logistics coordinator, who always arrived early and stayed late. Who'd never asked about my background, my experience, my qualifications beyond what appeared on an internal company directory. I can be operational in 30 minutes, I said. Do you need me at the Pentagon or are we running this remote? Remote for now. Full tactical command center. We're patching you through to Fort Meade. Colonel Martinez. General Lawson paused. It's good to have you back. The words hit differently than they might have 6 months ago. Back then, I'd been hungry for that recognition, that acknowledgement of who I really was. Now it felt like putting on clothes that still fit perfectly, but had been hanging in the closet for too long. Good to be back, General. I handed the phone back to Blackwood, who was watching me with the expression of a man who'd just discovered his accountant was actually an FBI agent. I'll need access to the secure communications suite, I said, and I'll need it now. Of course, he said, then turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to need to suspend this meeting. We have a matter of national security that requires immediate attention. The questions started immediately. A chorus of confusion and curiosity that might have been overwhelming if I hadn't spent years in briefing rooms, where the questions were literally matters of life and death. Richard, what's going on? Who exactly is she? What kind of logistics coordinator has direct Pentagon access? Has she been working undercover this whole time? I walked toward the door, my pace unhurried but purposeful. The same pace I'd used evacuating embassy personnel from hostile zones and coordinating international crisis responses. Behind me, the voices grew louder, more insistent, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. At the doorway, I turned back. Not to explain, not to justify, but to see. To take one last look at the room where I'd spent 18 months, being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed as just someone from logistics. Margaret Chen was still staring, her mouth slightly open. David Thompson had forgotten about his coffee entirely. Rebecca Walsh looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly revealed itself to be far more complex than she'd imagined. And there, in the back corner where the family members always sat during board meetings, was Elena Martinez, my sister. The woman who'd gotten me this job as a favor to our father. The woman who'd introduced me to these people as her little sister who needed some work experience. She wasn't looking confused like the others, she was looking terrified. Because Elena knew, she'd always known. And for the first time in 18 months, she was beginning to understand that the person she'd been protecting, the person she'd been helping, the person she'd been introducing as just someone from logistics, was about to disappear forever. The secure communications suite was on the 42nd floor. I took the elevator alone, watching the numbers climb, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me like armor I'd forgotten I knew how to wear. The doors opened, and I stepped into a different world entirely. Growing up in the Martinez household meant understanding your place in the constellation. Our father, Miguel Martinez, had built an empire from nothing. Starting with a single food truck in East Los Angeles, he'd expanded into a chain of restaurants, then catering, then food distribution across the Southwest. By the time Elena and I were teenagers, Martinez Family Enterprises was worth $40 million. Elena was the star, always had been. Valedictorian at Westfield Academy, summa cum laude from Stanford Business School, Harvard MBA at 24. She had our father's gift for seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, and our mother's talent for making people feel important while getting exactly what she wanted from them. I was the question mark. Not because I wasn't capable, my grades were excellent, my test scores off the charts, but where Elena saw business deals and market opportunities, I saw patterns. Systems. The way information flowed and where it could be disrupted. While Elena was networking at country club events, I was in my room learning programming languages and studying international relations. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Our mother, Carmen, tried to bridge the gap with gentle suggestions. Sophia, honey, maybe you could join Elena's entrepreneurship club at school. Or what about that young professionals organization she mentioned? Our father was more direct. You're smart, Misha, but smart doesn't pay bills. Elena understands how the world works. Maybe you should listen to her more. The thing was, I did listen to Elena. I watched her command rooms full of executives twice her age. I saw how she could walk into a negotiation and emerge with terms that seemed impossible 20 minutes earlier. I respected her abilities, even admired them. But I also saw something she didn't: the vulnerabilities, the points where confidence became overconfidence, the assumptions that worked beautifully until they didn't. Elena saw business as chess. I saw it as three-dimensional warfare, where the board could change at any moment. The dinner table conversations were always the same. Elena would share stories about her latest deals, her expanding network, her strategic partnerships. Our parents would beam with pride, asking follow-up questions, offering advice that she clearly didn't need. Then they'd turn to me. And what about you, Sophia? How are your classes going? Classes. As if I were still in high school instead of pursuing a double major in computer science and international security studies at UC San Diego. As if the research project I was conducting on cyber vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure was just homework. They're fine, I'd say. Because explaining the complexities of network security protocols over Sunday pot roast felt impossible. Elena would smile sympathetically. Sophia's always been more of an academic type. She'll figure out what she wants to do eventually. Eventually. The word that followed me through college, through graduate school, through every family gathering where cousins announced engagements and promotions and business ventures. The breaking point came during my senior year. I'd been selected for a research fellowship with the Department of Homeland Security, working on a classified project involving supply chain security. The work was fascinating, important, and completely secret. When I tried to explain it to my family, all they heard was, government internship. Elena had just closed a deal to supply organic produce to a major hotel chain, $3 million over 2 years. The local business journal wanted to do a feature article. You should be proud of your sister, our mother said to me after dinner. She's really making something of herself. I was proud of Elena, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Elena was making something of herself. I was still figuring things out. That night, Elena knocked on my bedroom door. She was holding 2 glasses of wine and wearing the expression she used when she wanted to have a serious conversation. "Can we talk?" she asked. I closed my laptop, hiding the classified briefing documents I'd been reviewing. "Sure." She sat on my bed, handed me a glass, and sighed in that way that meant she was about to deliver advice I didn't ask for. "Sophia, I'm worried about you." "Why?" "You're brilliant, everyone knows that, but brilliance isn't enough anymore. You need direction, purpose, a plan." I sipped the wine. It was expensive, probably something she'd picked up at one of her networking events. "I have a plan. Working for the government isn't a plan, it's a stopgap. You could do so much more in the private sector. I could introduce you to people, help you get interviews. My friend Rebecca Walsh is always looking for bright analysts at her investment firm." Rebecca Walsh. I'd meet her eventually, 18 months later, in a boardroom where she'd assume I was there to take notes. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I like what I'm doing." Elena leaned forward, her voice taking on the patient tone she used with difficult clients. "Sophia, listen to me, you're 22 years old. This is the time to build something real. Something that lasts. Government work is fine for people who want security and predictability, but you're capable of so much more." She paused, swirling her wine. "I just don't want you to wake up at 40 and realize you've spent your whole life playing it safe." Playing it safe. As if analyzing terrorist financing networks and mapping critical infrastructure vulnerabilities was the equivalent of working at the DMV. But I didn't argue, couldn't argue, because how do you explain that your safe government job involves briefing senators on national security threats? How do you tell your family that the skills they dismiss as academic are actually preventing cyber attacks on power grids and water treatment facilities? So I nodded and said, I'll think about it. 3 months later, I graduated with highest honors and accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in the Army Cyber Command. Elena threw me a graduation party, invited all her business contacts, and spent the evening apologizing for my military phase. She's always been a little different, I heard her tell a group of young entrepreneurs near the bar. Very idealistic. She'll probably do her 4 years and then come work for the family business. 4 years. As if serving my country was something I'd grow out of, like a college hobby or an awkward haircut. The gifts that night were telling. Elena gave me a leather portfolio for when you're ready to interview for real jobs. Our father gave me a check to help you get started on whatever comes next. Our mother gave me a pearl necklace for special occasions. None of them gave me anything related to my military service. No books on leadership, no congratulations on my commission, no acknowledgement that I was about to begin a career that would take me to places they couldn't imagine. That was the last time I tried to explain who I was becoming. Over the next several years, as I moved through assignments at Fort Gordon, then Fort Meade, then overseas postings that I couldn't discuss, the family conversations became increasingly strained. Elena's business continued to grow. She expanded into real estate, then consulting, then venture capital. Our parents couldn't have been prouder. Meanwhile, I was designing cyber defense protocols for NATO allies and coordinating responses to state-sponsored attacks. But all they saw was their daughter who'd chosen service over success. The final straw came during a Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Elena had just launched a new consulting firm, focused on supply chain optimization. She was explaining her strategy to our assembled relatives when Uncle Carlos asked about my work. Sophia's still in the military, Elena said with a slight smile. Some kind of computer work, very technical. I don't think even she fully understands how it all fits together. The laughter was gentle, familial, fond. The kind of laughter that dismisses without meaning to hurt. But it hurt anyway. Because by then, I'd already prevented 2 major cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure. I'd helped design the protocols that protected military communications across 3 continents. I'd briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff on emerging threats that could cripple entire economies. But to my family, I was still the little sister who'd chosen the safe path. Still the question mark who'd never quite figured out what she wanted to be when she grew up. That's when I made the decision to disappear. Not from the world, but from their version of it. To let them believe what they wanted to believe while I became something they couldn't imagine. It was Elena who got me the job at Meridian Industries. A favor to help her confused little sister gain some business experience. Something to put on a resume for when I was ready to be serious about my career. She'd introduced me to Richard Blackwood at a charity gala, explained that I had some technical background and might be useful in their logistics department. Nothing important, nothing that would require real responsibility, just something to help me learn how real businesses operate. Blackwood had been polite, professional, and completely unaware that the woman Elena was describing as needing, quote, some work experience, had more security clearances than his entire executive team combined. For 18 months, I played the role perfectly. The quiet logistics coordinator who took notes and asked occasional questions. The little sister who was finally learning how the business world worked. But every morning, I also logged into secure channels that connected me to crisis management centers around the globe. Every afternoon, I reviewed threat assessments and strategic recommendations that shaped international policy. Every evening, I submitted reports that influenced decisions made in the Pentagon and the State Department. Elena never suspected, none of them did. They saw what they expected to see, what they'd always seen. Sophia, the family question mark, finally getting some direction. Until the red phone rang, and direction found me instead. The day that changed everything wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday morning in September, and I was 21 years old, sitting in Professor Harrison's advanced cryptography seminar at UC San Diego. We were discussing theoretical vulnerabilities in financial networks when my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Not a weather warning or an Amber Alert. A flash notification from the Department of Homeland Security's Student Research Network, a program I'd been quietly participating in for 8 months. The message was brief, Critical infrastructure breach detected. Student analysts report to secure facility immediately. Transportation provided. Around me, my classmates continued taking notes on hash functions and encryption protocols. They had no idea that the theoretical concepts we discussed in that classroom were being weaponized in real time, just 200 miles north in San Francisco. I raised my hand. "Professor Harrison, I need to step out." He nodded absently, continuing his lecture on cryptographic salt techniques. I gathered my things and walked calmly to the parking lot, where a black sedan with government plates was waiting. The ride to the secure facility took 40 minutes. The driver didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't acknowledge my presence, beyond confirming my identity. I spent the time reviewing everything I knew about critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, trying to prepare for whatever I was about to walk into. The facility looked like a corporate office park from the outside. Generic glass buildings, manicured landscaping, nothing that would attract attention. But the security checkpoints told a different story. Multiple ID scans, biometric verification, metal detectors that could identify the composition of a paperclip. Inside, I was led to a windowless conference room where 6 other student researchers were already seated. I recognized 2 of them from previous briefings, Michelle Chen from MIT and David Rodriguez from Georgia Tech. The others were strangers, but their expressions told me they'd received the same urgent summons. At the head of the table sat Director Angela Foster, a woman I'd only seen in photographs. She ran the DHS Cyber Threat Analysis Division, and according to my security studies professors, she was one of the most brilliant strategic minds in government service. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Director Foster said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised to command attention. "What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. Nothing discussed in this room leaves this room." She activated a large monitor behind her. A map of the United States appeared, dotted with red indicators clustered along the west coast. At approximately 6:30 this morning, we detected coordinated probes against critical infrastructure networks in California, Oregon, and Washington. Power grids, water treatment facilities, transportation hubs, financial institutions. The attacks appear to be testing for vulnerabilities rather than attempting to cause immediate damage. Michelle Chen raised her hand. "Do we know the source?" "We have suspicions, but attribution is ongoing. What we know for certain is that this represents the most sophisticated reconnaissance operation we've seen targeting American infrastructure. The techniques being used are advanced, patient, and specifically designed to avoid detection by conventional security systems." Director Foster clicked to the next slide. A complex network diagram filled the screen, showing interconnected systems and potential attack vectors. "We need fresh eyes on this problem. Conventional wisdom and standard protocols aren't sufficient. We need people who can think outside established frameworks, who can see patterns that experienced analysts might miss because they're too close to the problem." She looked directly at me. "Miss Martinez, your recent analysis of supply chain vulnerabilities caught our attention. We'd like you to lead a team examining the transportation sector angles." Lead a team. At 21, with no formal government experience beyond my research fellowship, I was being asked to coordinate a response to a national security threat. The next 18 hours were unlike anything I'd experienced. Working alongside analysts with decades of experience, reviewing classified intelligence reports, mapping attack vectors across multiple critical systems. We worked in shifts, sleeping in cots set up in adjacent rooms, subsisting on coffee and vending machine sandwiches. I discovered that I was good at this work. Not just competent, genuinely talented. I could see connections that others missed, identify patterns in data that seemed chaotic to conventional analysis. Most importantly, I could think like an attacker, while maintaining the perspective of a defender. By the end of the second day, our team had identified 17 potential vulnerability points and developed countermeasures for 14 of them. More significantly, we'd traced the attack methodology to its likely source, a state-sponsored group testing American defenses in preparation for something larger. Director Foster gathered all the student researchers in the conference room one final time. "What you've accomplished here will directly impact national security policy for the next decade," she said. "Your analysis has been briefed to the National Security Council. Your recommendations are being implemented across multiple agencies." She paused, looking at each of us individually. You've also proven something important, that the future of cybersecurity doesn't just belong to people with 20 years of experience and top-secret clearances. It belongs to people who can adapt, innovate, and see threats from angles that conventional thinking might miss. When she reached me, she smiled. "Miss Martinez, I'd like to speak with you privately." After the others left, Director Foster sat across from me at the conference table. "I've been watching your work for months, not just during this crisis, but your research papers, your analysis of emerging threats, your approach to complex problems. You have a gift for this work." I felt something shift inside me, not pride exactly, but recognition. For the first time in my life, someone was seeing me clearly. Not as Elena's little sister, not as a question mark, not as someone who needed direction, but as someone with unique capabilities and potential. "Thank you, ma'am." "I want to offer you something," Director Foster continued. "A path, not just a job or a career, but a chance to make a real difference. We need people like you in government service, people who can think strategically, adapt quickly, and see the big picture." She slid a folder across the table. "This is information about the Army Cyber Command Officer Program. It would mean military service, advanced training, and assignments that would challenge everything you think you know about yourself and the world." I opened the folder. Military career progression charts, training program descriptions, security clearance requirements. It looked like something from a different universe compared to the business school brochures that covered my desk at home. "It's not an easy path," Director Foster said. "You'd be making sacrifices that most people your age can't imagine. You'd miss family gatherings, important events, normal relationship milestones. You'd work on problems that you can't discuss with anyone outside the intelligence community." She leaned forward. "But you'd also be protecting millions of people who will never know your name. You'd be preventing disasters that will never make the news because they never happen. You'd be part of something larger than any individual success or achievement." I thought about Elena, about her expanding business empire and networking events, about our parents' expectations and their definition of success, about the life that had been mapped out for me since childhood, business school, corporate career, eventual marriage to someone from an appropriate family. "How long do I have to decide?" "Take your time." "But Sophia," Director Foster stood, extending her hand, "don't let other people's limitations become your own. You're capable of things that most people can't even imagine. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out what those things are." The drive back to campus took place in silence. I stared out the window at familiar landscapes that suddenly seemed small and confined. The university, the city, even the state felt like boundaries that I was ready to cross. That night, I didn't go home. I didn't call Elena or our parents. Instead, I sat in my dorm room, reading and rereading the materials Director Foster had given me. Officer training at Fort Gordon. Advanced cyber warfare specialization. Assignments with NATO allies, classified missions that would take me to places I'd only read about in international relations textbooks. By morning, I'd made my decision. Not because I wanted to disappoint my family or prove them wrong, not because I was running away from their expectations or rebelling against their plans for my life, but because for the first time I could see myself clearly, not as someone's little sister or someone's daughter or someone who needed guidance and direction, but as someone with unique skills and the potential to make a difference on a scale that most people never get the chance to experience. 3 days later, I walked into the military recruitment office in downtown San Diego. I filled out the paperwork, took the oath, and began the process that would transform me from Sophia Martinez, the family question mark, into Colonel Sophia Martinez, someone my family couldn't begin to understand. The hardest part wasn't the physical training or the academic requirements or the security clearance investigations. The hardest part was watching my family's faces when I told them what I'd decided. But by then, I understood something they didn't. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't choosing the path that makes other people proud. Sometimes it's choosing the path that makes you proud of yourself, even if it takes them 18 years to understand what you've become. Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning was designed to break you down and rebuild you. For 12 weeks, everything about your civilian identity was stripped away, your assumptions, your comfort zones, your ideas about what you could and couldn't do. But I discovered something unexpected during those grueling months in Georgia. While other candidates struggled with the mental pressure and physical demands, I found myself thriving. Not because it was easy, but because it was purposeful. Every challenge, every obstacle, every seemingly impossible task had a reason behind it. During the third week, our tactical communications exercise simulated a scenario where standard radio channels had been compromised. We needed to establish secure communications between 3 separate positions, using only backup equipment and improvised protocols. While my fellow candidates focused on the equipment itself, I was analyzing the broader problem. If primary communications were down, what did that suggest about the nature of the threat? How would enemy forces likely attempt to intercept or disrupt our backup channels? What vulnerabilities existed in our improvised network that we weren't considering? Captain Rebecca Davis, our instructor, noticed my approach during the after-action review. Candidate Martinez, explain your methodology. I stood at attention. Ma'am, I assumed the communications failure was part of a coordinated cyber attack rather than equipment malfunction. I designed our backup protocols to include frequency rotation, encrypted burst transmissions, and redundant routing to minimize detection and interception. And your justification for that assumption? Ma'am, equipment failures are typically isolated and random. The simultaneous failure of multiple primary channels suggested deliberate interference. I treated it as an active threat environment rather than a technical problem. Captain Davis nodded slowly. After the exercise, she pulled me aside. Martinez, where did you learn to think like that? Homeland Security Research Program, ma'am. I studied critical infrastructure vulnerabilities before commissioning. I see. She made a note in my file. I'm recommending you for the Advanced Cyber Warfare track. It's a different program than standard officer training, more intense, more specialized, and it leads to assignments that most people never hear about. The advanced track meant an additional 16 weeks of training at Fort Gordon, home of the Army Cyber Command, where Officer Candidate School had been about leadership and general militar. My skills, this program was about becoming a weapon in a war that most people didn't even know was being fought. The instructors were veterans of cyber operations from Iraq, Afghanistan, and classified missions across Eastern Europe and the Pacific. They taught us to think in binary and probability matrices, to see network architectures as battlefields, to understand that modern warfare was as much about information as ammunition. My specialty became something called adaptive penetration analysis, essentially figuring out how to break into systems that were supposed to be unbreakable, then designing defenses against those exact techniques. The work was fascinating and terrifying. We learned about power grid vulnerabilities that could black out entire regions, financial system backdoors that could crash global markets, transportation networks that could be turned into weapons with the right access and knowledge. But we also learned about the people trying to exploit those vulnerabilities, state-sponsored hacker groups with resources that rivaled small countries, criminal organizations with technical capabilities that exceeded many government agencies, individual actors with both the skills and motivation to cause unprecedented damage. My first real assignment came 6 months after graduation. A joint task force operation called Digital Fortress, designed to assess and strengthen cyber defenses across critical military installations worldwide. I was assigned to a team of 8 officers, led by Major Thomas Chen, a veteran of cyber operations in Syria and Kosovo. Our mission: conduct penetration testing against supposedly secure military networks, identify vulnerabilities before enemy forces could exploit them. The work took us to military bases across 3 continents. Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where we discovered that the air traffic control systems could be accessed through the base commissary's point-of-sale network. Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, where the ship scheduling database was vulnerable to attack through the family housing internet system. Kadena Air Base in Japan, where the logistics coordination network had a backdoor that nobody had noticed for 3 years. Each discovery represented a potential catastrophe prevented, a vulnerability closed before it could be exploited. A disaster that would never happen because we found the weakness first. But the most significant operation came during my 2nd year of active duty. Intelligence sources had identified unusual network activity, suggesting that foreign actors were mapping American emergency response systems. Not attacking them directly, but learning their capabilities, response times, and coordination protocols. If successful, such intelligence could be used to maximize damage during a crisis by predicting and countering emergency response efforts. Imagine a terrorist attack where the perpetrators knew exactly how long it would take paramedics to reach victims, which hospitals had surge capacity, and how to disrupt communications between response agencies. I was selected to lead a counterintelligence operation called Phantom Shield. My team's mission: trace the reconnaissance activities back to their source, while simultaneously feeding false information to mislead potential attackers about our actual capabilities. The work required creating an elaborate deception. We built fake network vulnerabilities that appeared real to outside observers, but actually led to monitoring systems that would track anyone who attempted to exploit them. We constructed false databases filled with convincing but incorrect information about response protocols, equipment locations, and personnel assignments. For 8 months, we maintained this elaborate fiction while carefully tracking every probe, every attempted intrusion, every piece of intelligence that foreign actors thought they were stealing. The breakthrough came when we identified a pattern in the attack methodologies that matched techniques used in previous operations against European allies. Working with counterparts in French and German intelligence, we traced the activities to a specific group operating from multiple locations across Eastern Europe. But rather than immediately shutting down their access, we maintained the deception for another 4 months, feeding them carefully crafted misinformation that would make any attack based on their stolen intelligence likely to fail catastrophically. When we finally revealed the operation, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only had we identified and tracked a significant threat to American emergency response systems, but we'd also provided our allies with intelligence about ongoing operations against their own infrastructure. The commendation letter from the Joint Chiefs of Staff was classified at a level so high that even the existence of the letter was secret. But privately, Major Chen told me something that meant more than any official recognition. "Martinez, you didn't just stop an attack, you turned it into an advantage. That's not something they teach in any manual. That's something you either understand instinctively or you don't." My promotion to captain came ahead of schedule, along with assignment to the Pentagon's Strategic Cyber Operations Center. It was there that I began working on problems that spanned multiple agencies, international partnerships, and threat scenarios that most people couldn't imagine. One operation involved coordinating cyber defenses for humanitarian aid distribution in disaster zones, where enemy forces might attempt to disrupt relief efforts by attacking logistics networks. Another focused on protecting democratic election systems in allied countries from foreign interference attempts. The work was invisible by design. Successful cyber defense operations were measured by what didn't happen, attacks that failed, disasters that were prevented, crises that never developed. My family knew I worked for the military, but they had no frame of reference for understanding the scope or significance of what I actually did. During rare visits home, Elena would ask polite questions about my computer work, usually while discussing her latest business acquisition or expansion plans. Our parents would listen with patient smiles, clearly proud that I was serving my country, but equally clearly not understanding why someone with my education would choose military service over a lucrative private sector career. But by my 5th year of service, I'd been promoted to major and was leading a team responsible for cyber threat assessment across the entire Pacific region. My security clearance level was higher than most senators. The strategic recommendations I wrote were briefed to the National Security Council and influenced policy decisions that affected millions of people. And still, at family gatherings, I was introduced as Sophia. She works with computers for the Army. The disconnect was profound but not painful anymore. I'd learned to find satisfaction in the work itself, rather than external recognition. I knew the value of what I was doing, even if I could never explain it to the people who mattered most to me personally. It was during my 8th year of service that I received the call that would change everything again. Colonel Patricia Hawkins from Army Personnel Command wanted to discuss a unique opportunity for someone with my background and security clearances. The opportunity turned out to be a joint assignment with the private sector, a program designed to place experienced military cyber specialists in civilian companies with critical infrastructure responsibilities. The goal was to strengthen private sector defenses while maintaining government oversight of potential vulnerabilities. You'd maintain your military rank and security clearances, Colonel Hawkins explained during our meeting at the Pentagon. But you'd work within a civilian company, assessing their security posture and coordinating with government agencies on threat response. What kind of company? Meridian Industries. They handle logistics coordination for defense contractors, critical supply chains, emergency response equipment distribution. If their systems were compromised, it could affect everything from military readiness to disaster relief capabilities. The assignment would be classified, known only to a handful of executives and security officials. To everyone else, I would appear to be a civilian employee with some technical background. It's not a glamorous assignment, Colonel Hawkins admitted. You'd essentially be invisible, working behind the scenes while maintaining a cover identity that most people would consider unremarkable. I thought about my family, about Elena's constant suggestions that I transition to the private sector, about my parents' gentle hints that I should consider a more normal career path. How long would the assignment last? Initially 18 months, with possible extension based on operational requirements and threat assessment. 18 months of being invisible, of letting people underestimate me, of protecting critical systems while appearing to be just another office worker with basic technical skills. I'll do it, I said, because sometimes the most important work happens in plain sight, protected by the assumption that remarkable people always look remarkable. And sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that nobody sees coming. The secure communications suite on the 42nd floor of Meridian Industries looked like something from a spy movie. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying real-time data feeds from intelligence agencies across 5 continents. Multiple keyboards, encrypted phone lines, and biometric scanners that verified my identity before granting access to systems that officially didn't exist. I settled into the command chair and initiated the connection protocols I hadn't used in 18 months. The familiar interface materialized on the central monitor, a tactical command dashboard that linked me directly to Fort Meade, the Pentagon, and crisis coordination centers from London to Tokyo. Phantom Command, this is Colonel Martinez resuming operational status, I said into the secure headset. The response was immediate. Colonel Martinez, this is General Lawson. Confirming your authentication, we have multiple agencies standing by for your assessment. The briefing that followed painted a picture of escalating cyber warfare that made my previous operations look like training exercises. The Taiwan manufacturing breach wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a coordinated campaign targeting defense supply chains across the Pacific Rim. Colonel, we're looking at simultaneous probes against manufacturing facilities in Taiwan, semiconductor plants in South Korea, rare earth mining operations in Australia, and logistics hubs in Japan, General Lawson explained. The pattern suggests preparation for a large-scale supply disruption operation. I pulled up the threat analysis data, my fingers moving across multiple keyboards with muscle memory that 18 months of corporate meetings hadn't erased. The attack vectors were sophisticated, patient, and specifically designed to avoid triggering conventional security protocols. General, I'm seeing coordinated reconnaissance that maps entire supply chains rather than targeting individual facilities. This isn't about immediate damage. They're building a comprehensive map of how to maximize supply disruption with minimal initial investment. Agreed. What's your recommended response? I studied the data patterns, cross-referencing them with threat signatures from previous operations. The methodology was familiar, but the scale was unprecedented. We need a multi-vector counterstrike, I said. Not just defensive measures, but active deception operations. If they want to map our supply chains, we give them maps that lead where we want them to go. The next 6 hours blurred together in a symphony of strategic coordination that spanned multiple time zones and security classifications. Working with counterparts and allied intelligence agencies, I helped design a complex operation that would not only neutralize the immediate threat but turn it into a strategic advantage. The plan was elegant in its deception. We would allow the attacks to appear successful while actually feeding the attackers false information about supply chain vulnerabilities, manufacturing capabilities, and logistics coordination. Meanwhile, we trace their activities back to source networks and gather intelligence about their broader operational plans. But executing the plan required coordination with private sector partners who controlled many of the targeted facilities. Companies like Meridian Industries, whose logistics networks were critical to both civilian infrastructure and military readiness. Colonel Martinez, General Lawson said during our final coordination call, "We need you to brief the Meridian Industries Board of Directors on their role in this operation. They'll need to understand the national security implications and agree to participate in the deception protocols." I looked at my watch. The board meeting I'd left 6 hours earlier was probably still trying to understand what had happened when the red phone rang. "Understood, General. I'll handle the briefing. And, Colonel? It's good to have you back in operational status. Your country owes you a debt that can never be fully acknowledged." The words hit differently than they might have a year ago. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I finally understood that recognition and purpose weren't the same thing. I made my way back to the 38th floor, where the boardroom that had been filled with confusion and questions 6 hours earlier now buzzed with intense discussion. Through the glass walls, I could see most of the board members still gathered around the conference table, their faces animated with speculation and concern. Elena sat apart from the group, staring out the window with an expression I'd never seen before. Not confusion or anger, but something closer to awe, mixed with a kind of grief. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. The room fell silent immediately. Margaret Chen, who'd been mid-sentence in what appeared to be an animated discussion, stopped talking with her mouth half open. David Thompson set down his coffee cup with trembling hands. Rebecca Walsh looked like she was seeing a ghost. Richard Blackwood stood as I approached the head of the table. "Colonel Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there 18 months earlier. "I trust the situation has been resolved?" "The immediate threat has been neutralized," I said, "but we have a larger problem, and Meridian Industries is going to play a crucial role in solving it." I activated the boardroom's presentation system and began displaying classified briefing materials that painted a picture of cyber warfare operations spanning 3 continents. "Ladies and gentlemen, your company sits at the center of a critical infrastructure network that impacts everything from military readiness to disaster response capabilities. For the past 18 months, I've been conducting a security assessment of your operations while maintaining operational cover as a logistics coordinator." Dr. Jennifer Hayes, who'd spent so many meetings explaining basic business concepts to me, raised her hand hesitantly. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I'm having trouble understanding. You've been working here for 18 months as what exactly?" "As an undercover military intelligence officer, conducting a classified assessment of critical supply chain vulnerabilities. My cover identity was deliberately constructed to appear unremarkable, someone with basic technical skills, working in logistics coordination." The silence that followed was profound. I could see board members mentally reviewing every interaction they'd had with me, every assumption they'd made, every dismissive comment or condescending explanation. Margaret Chen was the first to find her voice. "When you say classified assessment, how classified are we talking?" "The operation I've been conducting here has security classifications that exceed the clearance level of most cabinet members. The intelligence gathered through this assessment has influenced strategic decisions at the highest levels of government." David Thompson leaned forward. "And the family connection? Elena's recommendation?" I glanced at my sister, who was still staring out the window as if she could wish herself somewhere else. "Completely legitimate. Elena had no knowledge of my military background or the nature of my assignment. Her recommendation provided perfect operational cover, a family favor that would explain my presence without raising suspicions about my actual qualifications or purpose." Rebecca Walsh spoke up, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "What exactly do you need from us?" Over the next hour, I outlined the critical role Meridian Industries would play in the counterstrike operation. Their logistics networks would serve as monitoring points for tracking enemy reconnaissance activities. Their international partnerships would provide cover for intelligence gathering operations. Their reputation for routine business operations would help maintain the deception that our countermeasures were normal corporate security improvements. The board members asked intelligent questions, raised legitimate concerns, and ultimately agreed to participate in an operation that would help protect critical infrastructure across multiple allied nations. But throughout the briefing, Elena remained silent. After the board members dispersed to begin coordinating with their respective departments, Elena and I were alone in the conference room. "How long have you been lying to me?" she asked, her voice quiet but not angry. "I've never lied to you, Elena, I just haven't told you everything." She turned from the window to face me. 18 months. 18 months of watching you take notes at these meetings, listening to explanations about basic business concepts, introducing you to people as my little sister who needed some work experience. I know. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? All those times I talked about your career prospects, your need for direction, your lack of understanding about how the real world works. Elena, I said gently, none of that was about you. It was about me doing my job. Your job. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sophia, what exactly is your job? I mean, really? I considered how much I could tell her, how much she would be able to understand or accept. I protect things that most people never think about. Power grids, communication networks, financial systems, supply chains that keep hospitals stocked with medicine and grocery stores stocked with food. I work to prevent catastrophes that would never make the news because they never happen. And you've been doing this for 11 years, since I was 22. Elena sat down heavily in one of the leather conference chairs. Jesus, Sophia, 11 years. All those family dinners where I talked about your need to find direction, your lack of career focus. You weren't wrong about everything, I said. I did need direction, I just found it in a place you wouldn't have expected. Why didn't you tell any of us? Because the work requires invisibility. The moment people know who you really are, you become less effective at protecting them. And because... I paused, choosing my words carefully. Because I needed to know that I was doing this work for the right reasons. Not for recognition or family approval, but because it was the right thing to do. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. The family business, she said finally. All those times Dad talked about building something that lasts, creating a legacy. You have built something that lasts. Martinez Family Enterprises employs hundreds of people, feeds thousands of families, contributes to communities across the Southwest. That's a legacy to be proud of. But what you're doing is different, not better, just different. Elena, you create value and opportunity and growth. I prevent destruction and chaos and collapse. The world needs both. She stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Those people in there, the board members, they're never going to see me the same way, are they? They're going to remember that I introduced the person who's apparently some kind of secret military operative as my little sister who needed career guidance. Elena, look at me. She turned. Your recommendation got me exactly where I needed to be to do crucial work for national security. Your business network provided the perfect cover for a classified operation. Your success and reputation made my cover identity completely credible. I smiled. You didn't just help your confused little sister find work experience. You helped protect critical infrastructure across 3 continents. That's not embarrassing, that's something you should be proud of. For the first time since the red phone had rung, Elena smiled back. So what happens now? Now I continue the work. The assignment at Meridian extends for another year, possibly longer. I'll coordinate the counterintelligence operation while maintaining my cover identity as a logistics coordinator. And you'll keep letting people underestimate you? Elena, the most dangerous person in any room is the one that nobody's paying attention to. Being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's a strategic advantage. 6 months later, the operation we'd launched that day had neutralized the supply chain reconnaissance network and provided allied intelligence agencies with crucial information about state-sponsored cyber warfare capabilities. The attacks that had been planned against Pacific Rim manufacturing were disrupted before they could begin. Critical supply chains remained secure. Millions of people were protected from disruptions they would never know had been prevented. Elena and I had dinner once a month now, usually at quiet restaurants where we could talk without being overheard. She'd stopped asking about my computer work and started asking more thoughtful questions about international relations, cybersecurity, and the invisible infrastructure that kept modern civilization functioning. Our parents still didn't fully understand what I did for a living, but Elena had gradually helped them recognize that their younger daughter had found her own version of success and legacy. At the most recent family gathering, when Uncle Carlos asked about my work, Elena answered before I could. "Sophia works in national security," she said simply. "She protects things that matter." And for the first time in 11 years, that felt like enough. The work continued. New threats emerged, new operations were planned, new crises were prevented. I remained invisible to most of the world, unknown to the people I protected, unrecognized by the systems I defended. But I'd learned something important during those 18 months at Meridian Industries, something that went beyond cybersecurity protocols and counterintelligence operations. Sometimes the most important recognition comes not from the world seeing who you really are, but from the people who matter most finally understanding that who you've always been was exactly who you needed to be. And sometimes the greatest success isn't building something that everyone can see, but protecting everything that everyone depends on, even if they never know your name. Especially if they never know your name. Because in the end, the most important work is often the work that remains invisible. The crises that never happen, the disasters that are prevented, the catastrophes that are stopped before they begin. And the people who do that work don't need applause or recognition or family approval. They just need to know that when they wake up each morning, the world is a little bit safer because of choices they made in rooms that nobody else will ever see. That's enough. That's everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.